to say good day to you this day of your time. How are you all? All right. All right. First and foremost, we thank each and every one of you once again for the co-creation of this interaction. It is always our passion and our pleasure to interact with each and every and all of you. This transmission has been titled, "The Past, the Present, and the Future Are Within You." And we will get to that in a moment. But let us give a brief recap about the concept of time. First and foremost, you have now for many years been talking about the idea that time is an illusion, and it is. In that sense, it isn't quote-unquote real, but it is real as an experience. And you create it with your consciousness in a very specific way. As many of you are beginning to realize, there are an infinite number of probable realities that, in a sense, overlap all at once, simultaneously, coexisting with what you consider your reality to be. And the idea is that time is a side effect created by shifting the focus of your consciousness through different parallel reality frameworks, literally billions of times per second. It's like your movie projector is your consciousness, focusing through different frames on a so-called film strip of reality. And as you illuminate frame by frame by frame by frame, you create this illusion, this projection of time and space and movement and change. Each and every frame has no movement in and of itself, no experience in and of itself. So you have to create the idea of continuity, one frame after another in linear terms, to create this idea, this projection, this holographic structure you call physical reality, space, time. Now, the idea of creating this is to give you a particular experience that allows you to forget that you are a greater being, and then go through a process of remembering that you are a greater being, but from a new point of view, a new discovery, a new perspective of yourself. This is how creation expands, because you see, the structure of existence never changes. What changes, what expands creation, is your relationship to, your reflection of, your perspective of, and your experience of that structure that never changes. So by creating these different perspectives, these different points of view of the same structure, you continue to expand creation, and all that is can experience itself in all the ways that it's possible to experience itself through each and every one of your unique viewpoints, being reflections of all that is. But the idea now is that for many millennia, you have been dealing with this concept of time in certain ways, but now it's time to start dealing with time in a different way. First and foremost, by even knowing and understanding that it is your projection, that it is a side effect of your consciousness, shifting these billions of times per second, the product of knowing that, the product of becoming aware that you're already shifting that quickly, is what creates this sensation you call acceleration. It's not that you actually accelerate or shift any faster than you have always been shifting. It's that by becoming more aware of the rate of shift, you experience it as a reflection in your physical reality more and more and more, and it appears as if your reality is actually accelerating. This expands your senses so that you can see more, feel more, be in touch with more things from a broader perspective, a higher point of view. And it allows you to experience physical reality as more flexible, more malleable, more plastic, where you can experience things like synchronicity more often, and other kinds of side effects of space and time that allow you to know that it is your projection, that it is your creation, and you can begin to have more conscious awareness of how to use it artistically to your advantage. The idea now, as we titled this, is that you have for a long time been anchored to this concept of the past creating your present. And as we have said many times, this is not actually true. It may be a description of the kind of experience you're having, but there's a big difference between a description of an experience from your space-time point of view and a description of the actual mechanism underlying the experience. two very different things very often. So the idea that you experience in space-time is that your past generates your present. In truth, your present generates your past. Because there is only now. There is only here. This is the only place you exist. It is the only place you create from. Therefore, when you define who and what you are in this present experience of yourself, by changing yourself literally into a different person every moment, and I mean this literally, it's not a metaphor, every moment, any change, total and complete change, you are a different person literally, on a different version of Earth literally, in a different multiverse literally. Therefore, every single time you change yourself, by whatever amount or degree, in whatever way, you are truly a new person. So in working through the idea of the framework of space-time, to make it make sense, logically, as you say, you have to have, linearly speaking, a new past that determines how you became the person you are now in the present that's different. So every single time you become a different person, that different person has a new past. Now, the idea may not seem to be that. You may go, well, I remember being this, and I remember being that, and that doesn't seem to have changed. But the point is, you don't actually know whether it's changed or not. Because when you become a new person and create a new past, it's going to seem from your present perspective that you always had that past, because that's the only past that makes sense for the person you are now. You don't know how many pasts you may have had in this life you call a single lifetime. The idea is that your history is constantly dynamically changing. When you understand that's how it works, when you understand that that's a description of the actual underlying mechanism at work, then regardless of what the experience appears to be, you will start to realize that you are changing your past every moment that you change yourself by any degree of definition. And that means you are free, truly, to experience whatever you prefer to experience, unlocking yourself from the idea of anything in the past that controls you in the present, which it doesn't. You simply create the illusion of continuity that in the present recreates the idea of the so-called memory, but the memory is not of the past. You're recreating that memory in the present as part of the definition of your present self. So if you break continuity and stop defining yourself that way, you actually will experience the results of having a different past, because it will show you that you have a completely different present that has nothing at all to do with what the past used to be for whoever that other person was that is no longer you. Is this making some sense? We understand that sometimes these higher dimensional concepts can seem a little bit challenging, a little bit confusing, but don't worry, you'll get used to it. The idea is that you are beginning to think multidimensionally, and this is why we share multidimensional perspectives with you, because it stretches your ability to really experience yourself as a multidimensional being, which is what you are. Please remember that the idea is your greater self is your natural state. You are not really naturally physical people. You are greater non-physical entities, non-physical consciousness. You never really actually leave what we'll call the spirit realm. You have never left it. You're there right now, dreaming that you're not. That's what physical reality is. A dream you are having in spirit that you're no longer in spirit. So when you wake up from the physical dream, you go, oh, that was just a dream. This is who I really am. Much in the same way when you are physical and wake up from a dream, no matter how real the dream seemed in your sleep time, you wake up and go, oh, that was just a dream. Very real dream, but that was just a dream, and this is who I really am. The same thing will happen when you transition into spirit. Oh, that was just a dream. This is who I really am, but I can learn from that dream. What is it I went there to learn? What is it I dreamt I needed to know? That's what you will do. But continuing on with the idea of how you use space and time in a new way, in this new understanding, is that, as we have said, for a long time, you anchored yourself into this concept of the past. But now, as you transition and you start living more in the present, you begin to realize that you are free to choose where the so-called influence actually comes from. If you want to create this concept of continuity and being influenced by something, you can switch the idea of being influenced from your so-called past to starting to be influenced from your so-called future self. Because even in this life, you have future selves every moment. Now you are here, now you are here, now you are here. But this here was the future of that first now you are here. So the idea is that every moment as you're shifting, again, billions of times per second, you can begin to shift your focus forward, so to speak, still living in the present, but understanding that you're now drawing information, energy, and experience, not so much from the past anymore, unless it serves you to do so, but now from the future you, who is urging you and encouraging you forward and forward and forward into your higher self, into the self you prefer to be. And as this switch occurs, and as this focus shifts, you will begin to feel more communication from the higher mind, more synchronicity in your life, because you know that the future you, or what you deem to be the future you, is living that way. And so as that becomes more real for you, as you in the future become more real to you in the present, in the same way that the you in the so-called past has been real for you for so long, as you shift that focus to the future you and that becomes more real, you will gain more insight. You will be able to be and mirror that version of you more and more easily, more and more effortlessly, and you will start living the life in the present of what you deem the future to be. Is this making some sense? So you are shifting your focus now because, again, as we say, this so-called past and the present and the future all exist within you. There is no out there. It is a reflection, just like a mirror in your reality. If you're looking in the mirror and you see your reflection frowning, you don't go over to the mirror and shout at it to change the reflection. The only way the mirror will be able to smile at you is if you smile first. If you are waiting for the outer reality to change to make a difference in your life, you will wait forever. But when you decide to change, no matter what's going on around you in the reflection, that is proof of true change, because you're not making your change conditional on what's going on in the outer reflection. You're saying that doesn't really matter to me, because I know that I can allow anything to serve me in a positive way. I am not basing my state of being on the old-fashioned, outdated meanings that others have given to what's going on in this reality. I get to decide what this means. I get to decide what the definitions are that work for me, because I am my own reality. I am my own unique point of view, and I get to say what goes. So the idea is for you to start relaxing the old definitions and realize at any given moment what definitions you are applying to things that don't work for you, and start applying definitions that do. Because as you have experienced, existence is going to support you no matter what you choose. It doesn't really contradict you. It can't. Again, in the same way that the mirror can't contradict you for whatever your facial expression is. It has to give you back what it is you're giving off. That's simply the way it's structured. So if it has supported you when you're frowning and given you negative synchronicity, why wouldn't it support you when you decide to smile and get positive synchronicity? It will not contradict you. It absolutely will not, because it's waiting for you to determine who you are, what state of being you prefer, so it can reflect that to you. It doesn't care what you choose because it's unconditionally supportive. That's what unconditional means. You are so unconditionally supported, in fact, you are even allowed to believe that you are not unconditionally supported. That's how unconditionally supported you are. So if you can believe that you are not unconditionally supported, you're not going to be contradicted when you start to believe that you are supported unconditionally. It's just that you have the control. So allow yourself to take the time to explore the idea of connecting more to your own future self in this life, knowing that your future self is already experiencing simultaneously the kinds of things that you prefer to experience in your life now, in the present, so that you can act more like that version of you and become more like that version of you in the new presents that keep coming as you flow your projector light through the present frame, present frame, present frame, present frame. And by acting on your passion and staying in your center and staying in the positive state and extracting the benefit from whatever is happening, then you navigate yourself through all the frames that are more and more and more and more indicative and reflective of that reality you say you prefer to experience, because you're the one creating that within yourself. It's not coming from outside, it's coming from within you. One final very important thing is that to remember, it doesn't matter what happens. It matters what you do with what happens. That's what makes the difference in your reality. It makes all the difference in the world. Does that make sense? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to share this idea. Let it sink in its own good time. Make it your own. Use it how you will. And have fun with it. Remember, the first step toward enlightenment is to lighten up. Don't take things so seriously. Have some fun. It's a process. Life is a process, but it can be an energizing, exciting, ecstatic, synchronistic one if you allow it to be. Each and every one of you has a current in the ocean of creation that is unique to you. Going with the flow means you allow yourself to know that the current knows where you need to go. Go with that flow. Don't resist. Don't swim upstream. Unless, of course, you enjoy pain. The idea is to know that surrender is not surrendering control. Surrender is surrendering to the control that's already innately built into you. Allow it to express itself through synchronicity, through imagination, through being here and now, which is all there is. In return for the gift that you are allowing our civilization to experience in each and every one of you, I ask you now, in what way may we be of service to you? Please begin with your questions and dialogue, if you wish.
So, are you ready? Okay.
Good day to you this day of your time. How are you all? We will take that as an okay. We thank you once again, each and every one of you and all of you together collectively, for the co-creation of this interaction that affords us an opportunity to experience through all of you many more facets of the multidimensional crystal of all that is. So we thank you for expanding our awareness of all the different ways that creation can express itself. Let us begin with the understanding and the idea and the sharing that has to do with the relationship between physical mind and higher mind, functioning as a whole person. Now, each and every one of you made a choice to experience physical reality, to live a physical life. When that choice is made from spirit, from the non-physical level, what you do, generally speaking, whether it be in full consciousness or automatically, is you'll begin to lay out a foundation in what might be referred to as a template level reality. A frequency, a domain of reality just above physical reality, what some might refer to as a lower astral realm. In this template reality, energy, vibrations are somewhat slower than the idea of higher spiritual realms, but not quite as slow, not quite as dense as physiological reality. Nevertheless, it's close enough so that it can be used as a template to set up certain scenarios, to play out, to blueprint certain scenarios that will be experienced in the physical reality to come. By setting up these scenarios, these themes for exploration in the template reality, you thus create a kind of automatic function that allows you to focus on the experience and exploration of that theme when you are in physical reality without having to think too much about how that's being done. It's part of the creation of the consensus agreement. That happens in the template level reality, where you all agree to create certain similar circumstances, certain similar conditions by which you will all experience physical reality. It's the level on which you all generally agree to the general rules by which you will play the physical reality game. Once then that has been established in template fashion and set into place, your consciousness then, in a sense, passes through that template on its way to physical reality, on its way to crystallizing yourself into physical materiality, bonding with the idea of the physical body, consolidating down to that focus. And by passing through that template level, you take on the attributes of the general agreed upon reality. You start to imbue yourself and infuse your consciousness with a structure. You crystallize a particular structure that is representative of that reality in which you will have an experience. A similar analogy would be to you that you are deciding to go deep sea diving. And you must then prepare by putting on the proper wetsuit, putting on the proper diving apparatus, and your breathing equipment. You prepare yourself for the environment into which you are about to plunge. Thus then, as you lower yourself, regulate your air, so on and so forth, become accustomed to the deeper pressure below the sea, so too, in a sense, do you become more accustomed by this crystallization process to the idea of the experience of physicalizing yourself and the limitations that go with that. Now, remember, even though this life, for most of you, is all about letting go of many of your limitations, many of them still serve a purpose. They still serve to keep you focused in physical reality. So just the concept itself of limitation is not inherently a negative one. What you do with that concept can be positive or negative. Nevertheless, getting back to the idea of this progression, as you thus then connect to the idea of the physical seed that is being born to create a bonding with the concept of a body, as you crystallize your spirit into that physicality, you actually aid and assist in the formation of that embryonic form, imbuing it with many of the crystallization ideas you have brought with you as spirit, and you work with that embryonic body in your mother's wombs to create the being, the personality structure that will best exemplify the themes that you chose to explore in the reality. While working in that sense with that embryonic structure, you will find that most of the template ideas, most of the thematic ideas that you will explore in physical reality, that you thus then crystallize into that embryonic body, are done after, on or after the 49th day of the existence of that embryo. Up to that point, the embryo structure does not have the capacity to lock in those template ideas. Because what has not yet formed in the embryo is the necessary and essential and crucial pineal gland. Once the pineal gland exists, because it is in the brain the gateway and the doorway between higher and lower realities, it is necessary for it to be there in the embryo to function as the gland that incorporates those template ideas and thus then starts to arrange the idea of the neurology of the brain in such a manner and the cellular structure of the body in such a manner as to be conducive to the ideas and the themes that are being crystallized in that body. Once the embryonic form then is sufficiently organized to be a match for the frequencies that are representative of the kind of experiences and themes you have chosen to explore in physical reality, there then starts to become more and more and more a solid vibrational link between the idea of the physical form and the spirit form. Now, this will still be somewhat tenuous for quite some time. Even children that are born will have, generally speaking, anywhere from 3 to 7 years to decide if they actually wish to play out that physical life even longer, before the idea of the vibrational link between spirit and body becomes relatively cohesive and relatively unbreakable. But especially up to the age of 3, you will find that many spirits may have only wanted to experience a little tiny bit of physical reality, just want to, in a sense, get their so-called spiritual feet wet, but don't necessarily want to have a full lifespan. So you will find that many individuals who are still very young will simply choose one day to leave. This is not the only reason, but it is one of the major reasons for what many individuals on your planet call unexpected crib death. They will just have lived out the span that they chose to live, and they will simply go back into spirit. The idea also of what you might refer to as either miscarriage or abortion is also something that, in a sense, serves the spirit's purpose of choosing someone who wouldn't necessarily choose to have a full-term child, and thus by forming a link with a person who has made that kind of a choice, they will get to experience just the portion of physical existence that they chose to experience and no more. Now, this is not in any way, shape, or form a commentary on that kind of choice. It is simply saying that nothing goes to waste, and in that sense, it all serves some spirit's purpose. So in that sense, doesn't need to be looked at in any kind of a judgmental way. It is simply a choice, a circumstance, and an opportunity that is taken advantage of by those it can serve. Now, as you further crystallize the embryonic form, and it starts to set up cellular structures and neurological pathways in the physical body that are representative of the kind of themes you will explore, what it also starts to create is the personality construct. The representation of the intelligence of the spirit, the consciousness of the spirit, will in a sense be mocked up in the body. It will have a template form of its own that is represented by the capacity for belief systems, emotions, and thought patterns and actions. This prismatic template in the brain is set up to receive certain kinds of information that are conducive to the expression of that spirit's choice of thematic experiences. Thus, that personality becomes uniquely fixed and uniquely capable of expressing itself along the lines specifically of the themes that were chosen for exploration. This is not to say that the personality cannot be malleable, for it is, but the idea is that it is specifically designed to absorb information that is along the lines of the chosen themes. Now, of course, when a child on your planet is born to its parents, it will, because it is still absorbing, still laying the foundations of that template, still crystallizing for a while, it will absorb all of the telepathic input of the parents, of the society, And as it locks into that, it will pick up on belief systems from the parents, from society, and begin to incorporate those into its matrix as well. Oftentimes, both belief systems that are conducive to its thematic exploration and belief systems that are not necessarily conducive to its thematic exploration, except as belief systems that give the child an opportunity to later determine that it has a comparison to make between belief systems picked up from others that don't belong to it and what belief systems it would prefer. Again, all the absorption serves a purpose, but some of the belief systems may not necessarily ultimately be conducive to what that personality's choices are, but it is still part of the theme of exploration to have picked up those belief systems from your parents and from your society in order to later decide more clearly, based on your comparison of self to those belief systems, who you are and who you are not, because that's a part of the experience generally that you explore in physical reality to define yourselves and to go from the idea of limitation to less limitation, to go from the idea of forgetting to remembering, to go from the idea of pulling yourself together as a holistic being, having gone through the idea of separation and segregation within your consciousness. So it all serves a purpose. Even though you will divest yourself of certain belief systems as you grow, they still served a purpose of being there because they gave you something to compare the ideal self against and gave you a measure of where you're going. So in that context, all of your parents have served you. Even though they may not have known how they were doing it or what they were doing, even though they might have been, if within their own integrity, more capable of expressing the idea of love to you in a more positive way. Nevertheless, because they may have had their own fears, their own doubts, their own issues of exploration that may never have been resolved for them, they still handed down to you those things that still give you the opportunity to decide more concretely who you are, even if only by recognizing through what they have given you who you are not. So it still serves all of you in that way if you are willing to use it that way. Now, this brings us to the idea of the personality structure, the physical mind, and its relationship to higher self. Let us now rewind this, go back a little bit to where you first were forming from spirit that template reality. Aside from the mechanism we have now described of forming the physical side of the personality, the physical side of the person you will be in physical reality experience, at the same time, when you lay out that template, you also, from spirit, create a duality. You create not only the physical side, the physical mind, but you create the template called the higher mind that goes specifically with that person. So every person is a person in totality when they express the idea of physical mind and higher mind. That is what makes you a whole person capable of exploring the idea of physical reality. Above that level, what you might call soul or spirit, it isn't broken out in that way. It is mostly the experience of what you would simply call higher mind, but it is not the same exact experience of higher mind, not the higher mind template that is formed to go hand in hand with the physical persona. But the higher mind template that is formed by the spirit acts as the liaison between the physical mind and the higher levels of your own soul. And so it remains to a great degree in the template level reality. Again, it is, by analogy, the individual still standing on the boat helping the diver who has gone down below, making sure that they are given every support that they need, making sure they are still in communication, and helping to guide them from the surface in any way that they can by taking readings of what's going on around them and helping them in their exploration down below. So higher mind stays on the boat, physical mind goes deep sea diving. Now, Once this relationship is established, then the idea is to get these two to work in concert, to get the physical mind and the higher mind to work in concert. Now, because your view deep, deep, deep under the ocean is limited, as it is when you go as a spirit deep, deep, deep into physical reality, the idea is to rely on the higher mind, the person on the boat, to be able to guide you to the horizon because they can see farther than you can. The deeper you go in the ocean, the darker it gets, the murkier it gets, the less visibility you have. The deeper you go into physical reality, the more limited your point of view can be. But you can always rely on the fact that the higher mind, still up there on the surface on the boat, can see clearly to the horizon and can, with the proper communication, guide the diver in the proper direction. So the idea then is to recognize that because you will experience a kind of disconnection from the surface, disconnection from the higher realm, it is important to rely on the communications of the higher mind for guidance. However, the paradox is that very often, not so much that it has to be this way anymore in your reality, but especially in your history, diving deeply into physical reality has created the kind of disconnection and the kind of forgetfulness and the kind of limitation that allows you to not even remember you have had a higher mind. And therefore, you have created within yourselves, nevertheless, as part of your template, an urging within the physical persona to seek the higher mind. Because the higher mind knows, and the spirit knew when it formed the template, that it was highly likely the physical persona might get lost in the darkness. So it always gave the physical persona that one seed, that one spark, that urge to go toward the idea of the light, to go toward the idea of the higher mind, and to form that reconnection. This is expressed as the creative desire, the desire for love. That is what that is. The feeling of desiring love, the feeling of love, the desire to express oneself fully, creatively, in that sense, is different ways of experiencing the seed that is created in the template that urges you back in that direction, urges you to reconnect with the higher self. Now, again, because of the degree of disconnection experience and the degree of forgetfulness that exists in the idea of physical reality, we understand that even that can sometimes be distorted, be clouded, be filtered. Nevertheless, the urge is there. It is always driving you to look for that which allows you to feel complete. And in many ways, when many of you are looking for things to allow you to feel complete, that's actually what you're looking for. You're looking for your connection to the higher mind, to reconnect, to form that relationship with the higher mind. We understand that many of you may, because of the forgetfulness, because of the filtration, because of the disconnection, because of the distortion, you may interpret the idea of that which you need for completion in a variety of different ways. Some individuals will feel that desire for completion by expressing it through the need for another person or the need for sustaining oneself with food or many other things. This idea, however, is all predicated on the notion that what you're actually looking for is that reconnection to the higher self. This is not to say it cannot be expressed in a number of ways, or that those things cannot to some degree represent part of the path of reclaiming that connection. But very often, because of the forgetfulness, the physical mind and the ego structure may assume that the thing that in some sense is on one level representative of that reconnection is the reconnection itself, and it is all that is needed for the reconnection, and it often stops you short of making the reconnection because then you become fixated on the symbol of the reconnection rather than the reconnection itself. Now, The idea of the ego structure is basically this. It is simply for the purpose, its really only job is simply for the purpose of keeping you focused as a physical personality in your physical reality experience. That's its job. It's just to focus you in physical reality. Ego, in a sense, is like the diving mask that gives you the ability to have a clear view underwater, so that things are not too murky, so that you can see, sort of, at least to some degree, what is ahead of you, where you are going. It brings things of the physical reality into focus so that you can concentrate on them, so you can focus on them, so you can have a physical reality experience. It creates the idea and reinforces the idea of the belief systems that are part and parcel of the template of your consciousness, of your personality structure that you have created, reinforces them so that those beliefs can be experienced as fully as possible. That's why every single belief is self-reinforcing. Because the ego's job is to add energy to it, add focus to that belief, to make it seem as if no other belief is possible, in order for you to focus on the belief strongly enough to actually have the physicalized manifestation and the experience that goes hand in hand with that particular belief you are holding to be true at any given moment. So the ego's job is to amplify those beliefs, to keep you focused in physical reality, to keep you focused in that experience. But when there is a degree of forgetting that exists to the extent that it has in your reality, very often, because of that sense of disconnection, because of that experience of disconnection, not that you're ever really disconnected, because you cannot be, but you can create the experience of disconnection to such a degree that the physical personality structure, the ego structure, can forget that it's not actually the one in charge, can forget that it has a helpmate in the template reality called the higher mind, can forget that it is not doing this alone. And in suddenly finding itself in the experience of being alone, it starts to build up the idea of fear. It starts to reinforce belief systems in a way that perpetuates its existence beyond the necessary level that it is actually required to generate for its continued existence. It starts to think that if it is all there is, then it's in charge of everything. The burden and the weight of the world is on its shoulders. The responsibility for everything that happens in your physical reality is up to the ego structure, and it starts to take on that job when it is not built for that job. It starts to burden itself, stress itself. And in that way, it starts to break down. It starts to do wildly incongruous, wildly irrational things to strengthen itself, and strengthen itself under the feeling that it is crumbling under the weight. And by constantly reinforcing and strengthening itself in a way it was not designed to do, it can become extremely dense, extremely crystallized, and very difficult then to allow to expand back out into its more relaxed state, its more relaxed focus. And when it gets that concentrated, the amount of energy the ego puts into belief systems that are generally fear-based are going to be almost overwhelming. Because it is taking on this burden from a perspective of fear, most of its energy, most of its reinforcement is going to be fear-based. It's going to choose those things that are based on survival mode. It's going to reinforce itself with the idea that it must survive at all costs at this concentrated level. Otherwise, your life will end. It will be annihilated. The personality will dissolve. So the ego structure does everything it can to take on this tremendous burden. Let's all give the poor little ego a break before the ego breaks down. Therefore, in this day and age, even in that concentration of ego physical personality structure, even in that degree of density, look, you have still still felt that little seed, that little urge that calls you back to the higher self, back to that frequency, back to the light, even from that deep degree of murky darkness, you still were capable of sensing somewhere that there must be some kind of higher vibration that calls to you, that tugs at you, that pulls at your heart, that allows you to feel, to know there is some level of reality wherein the ego is free, the personality is free to be what it was designed originally to be, and that there is no need for the stress and strife and struggle and dire consequences and dire experiences that the ego has for thousands of years on your planet sought to perpetuate in generation after generation after generation, constantly be reinforced and reinforced from generation to generation to generation. Now is the timing that you have finally gotten to the point where the light is bright enough, where enough of you are seeking that light within yourselves, that you are adding that to the collective reality and giving each other better opportunities with your collective momentum to know that there is a level of reality, a level of yourselves, a level of your whole being that is more than capable of reconnecting with you, that you deserve to reconnect with and deserve to lighten your load, lighten up on yourselves, take the load off, drop the baggage, and get on your way through life in an easy and effortless, creative manner. And this is the time and the age on your planet where you're now realizing that, so congratulations. Now, we will share something with you to further strengthen the idea of the many different ways that you are starting to attract yourselves back to your own higher minds. So we will now share a little secret with all of you that we have shared with a few, and it is this. In these conversations that you are having with us, whether they be in this group structure or in one-to-one scenarios, doesn't matter. When you are speaking with us, you are actually speaking with your own higher mind. You are not speaking directly with us at all, ever. What we have done to aid and assist you by your invitation is we have wrapped the flavor of our personality like a shell around the core of your own higher self. And in every conversation we have with you, what we are doing thus then is giving you an excuse to talk to your own higher mind by tricking you into thinking you're talking to something else. Because that something else was one step removed from your own higher mind. In that context, wasn't as scary to the ego as thinking that you're actually addressing your own higher mind and all that that implies in terms of what you now have to take responsibility for. Therefore, the idea is that if you could find some vibration, some representation of a being that at least would represent that level, but was still one step removed, then it wouldn't be quite as scary and you could deal with it at your own pace in a comfortable way. Well, the idea here is that yes, while obviously we are involved, the actual communication you are having with us is actually the communication with your own higher minds, but wrapped in our vibrational flavor in order to allow you to use us as a permission slip to give yourselves permission to actually communicate with your own higher minds in a relaxed way and get your assumptions and your beliefs and your definitions and your ego structure out of the way so that you will allow yourself that communication. So congratulations on being so clever as to invite us to help you to trick yourselves into speaking to your higher minds. Now, with this realization, then you can begin more and more every day in every way to relax the idea that there is fear attached to speaking and reconnecting to your own higher mind. The ego can now be taught that it will not die, it will not be annihilated just because you are going to make a conscious reconnection to your higher mind, it will be given the opportunity to just do its job in a relaxed, creative, and loving way. It will be given its proper place in the idea of that whole person structure. It will be allowed to simply perform as it was designed to perform. It will not be overburdened with tasks and jobs that do not belong to it, and not only do not belong to it, but for which it is not designed, not capable of actually carrying out. As we have said previously in other transmissions, physical personality is not designed, is not capable, literally not designed to know how something is going to happen. It's not designed to read the giant template where the higher mind resides. It is only designed to know how something is happening or has happened in physical reality. So the idea is that when the ego forgot that it was connected to the higher mind, it thought it needed to take on the duty, the job description of the higher mind of trying to figure out how everything is going to happen. Well, this is my dream. This is my desire. Now, how am I going to make that happen? I don't know, but I'm going to try. I'm going to struggle. I'm going to pull a little at this. I'm going to grab at straws. I'm going to reach out, flail around till I can figure out how to make this work, how to force it to work, how to push everything together in the way that I want it to be. When in fact, it's simply the idea of allowing the higher mind to bring it to you in the way the higher mind knows is best for the whole person that you have chosen to be and best for the themes that you have chosen to explore. Only the higher mind knows how it is best for that to happen, because only the higher mind can see all the way to the horizon, can see the full path ahead, knows where all the twists and turns are, and thus knows what is actually the quickest route to the manifestation of your dreams. But when the physical ego thinks that it knows the best route, it will constantly be slamming into walls, bouncing off of rocks, banging its head into walls, and all sorts of things, because it believes that it knows, and it is the only thing that knows, and it will insist on going certain ways that it has been taught to believe is the quickest path to its dreams and desires, but which very often is actually the longest route. So instead of going around these things, around the things that it defines as obstacles, it will stand in front of them and constantly bash itself against these obstacles instead of listening to the higher mind that tells it that even though it may seem to take a little longer to go around, it's actually the quickest route, because by going around you will go that much more quickly than the time it will take for you to stand there and smash your head against the wall until you finally figure out you're not going to go through it. So the idea, again, is to recognize that physical mind does not have the capacity to know how something's going to happen. Let that be the job of the higher mind. Just allow the physical mind to enjoy what it is brought, to see how it happened, to marvel at the synchronicity of how the higher mind was capable of organizing events, so that it would serve the idea of the theme you chose to explore in the most loving, creative, beneficial, joyful way possible, most playful way possible. You must learn that the physical mind and the higher mind need to work together in order to be the whole person. Because if, in that sense, you are only using your physical personality, your physical mind, in an attempt to figure out how everything is supposed to work, you are literally walking through life half-witted. You're only using half of your full mind. So the idea is to understand that you really don't have a whole mind until you form a reconnection and a relationship and a communication style with the higher mind that allows you free-flowing trust, free-flowing communication in that relationship of functioning like a whole being. Now, imagination has been given as part of the personality structure to allow it to understand that it always has access to the higher mind. Imagination is the conduit, the pipeline to the higher mind and from the higher mind. But again, when the ego structure becomes so crystallized, so densified that it thinks it's the one in charge and has to figure every single little thing out, It will not trust the imagination. It will shut the door to the imagination because it seems unreal, superfluous, having nothing to do with what the ego has determined are the necessary things it must do to get where the person wants to go. So it will close and constrict that pipeline, and it will not trust the imagination because it seems like the imagination is irrelevant, has nothing at all to do with what the ego has determined are the necessary steps. But what it has done by doing that is it has constricted the flow of communication coming from the higher mind that is actually the kind of information the physical personality needs in order to actually relax itself and move on through life in an effortless way. The idea, again, is to understand that once you form a relationship with the higher mind, once you form a balanced relationship with it, imagination is the conduit through which inspiration will come, and in which you will allow the physical personality to know that it is in constant communication with the person up on the boat, and that it will never be guided into a crevasse, it will never be guided into the mouth of a shark. It will always be guided straight toward the horizon that represents the dream and the theme that the personality chose to explore, and all the transitions can happen quite magically when those lines of communication are open. Again, we remind you of this. Very often, the ego might be willing to use the imagination a little bit, but again, it often subverts the use of the imagination for its own purposes, to reinforce its own ideas of what it thinks is the best way to allow something to manifest. The physical personality may be willing from time to time to create a vision, an ideal vision of the dream. It will create all the scenario. You have heard us say, and you've heard many say, visualize, visualize, visualize. Create a mock-up in your mind's eye, in your imagination, of the ideal scenario that represents to you the idea of your highest excitement, your highest passion. And this is a good thing to do. This is a positive thing to do. It is a beneficial and creative thing to do, to use your imagination and visualize what is a representation, the closest possible representation you can create with your physical mind of that ideal scenario that you say is representative of your passion, of your dream. But here is the key. It is only a representation. Now, this is not to say that what you imagine at that moment cannot come to pass exactly as you have imagined it. Oftentimes, it happens exactly that way, and that is all well and good. But the only reason it may have happened that way is you actually allowed a momentary opening and actually recognized what the higher mind was telling you was the representation of the best way for you. Nevertheless, here is where many individuals on your planet fall into the trap. Again, because of the ego structure's predilection for thinking it has to figure everything out and know how everything is going to happen. When the ego structure may make a vision that is representative of the ideal reality, what the ego tends to think, because it thinks of itself as the highest possible authority for your person, it tends to think that that vision it has created by using imagination in that way to paint that picture in your mind, it thinks that that's the highest possible way in which that reality could manifest. But from the higher mind's point of view, that picture that to the ego seems like the highest possible manifestational form is actually the lowest possible manifestational form. What to the physical ego is the ceiling, to the higher mind is the floor. It can go much higher than that, and in fact, it can actually go so high, so far, it can actually be beyond physical mind's capability of imagining how it could occur. That's why you do not need to insist. The physical mind and the ego does not need to insist that the picture it conjures up as a representation of the ideal scenario must be the exact way that it must manifest, otherwise something has failed, something has gone wrong. It is just used as a template to pass on to the higher mind the basic idea that represents, pay attention, the proper vibrational state of being that the physical being needs to experience in life. in order to perpetuate its joy. The higher mind will take that template, take that representation, because after all, it exists in a template reality. It understands template language very well. That's its native tongue. Template symbols are its native tongue. It understands symbols very well. It will take that symbol and recognize that that symbol simply represents the proper state of being, the proper energy that needs to be created. And so the higher mind will then take that symbol and it will reach out to all the things it understands are available, all of the how can this happen sort of thing, and it will match those things to the proper template frequency and then bring that into the reality, the opportunities for the physical mind to act upon. But when the physical mind hesitates to act on the synchronicities that are brought to it because the ego says, I don't recognize that as the template I set up, and doesn't trust that the higher mind could have actually brought it the opportunity it wants in a different form other than what the ego determined it should be, it will refuse to act on those things. It will refuse to recognize those as opportunities. Those opportunities coming from the higher mind will even be invisible to the physical mind. It just simply won't even know they are even there to be acted upon. And therefore it will miss those doorways and will never walk through them and will never see the manifestation of its desires because it has been too insistent on the how and not allowed the higher mind to actually show the physical mind the true how, because the higher mind can actually imagine ways far beyond the physical mind's imagining of how such a thing could occur. So, all well and good to set up the parameter of a visualization for the physical mind, but don't insist it must manifest that way, because the higher mind might be capable of bringing it to you far greater than you ever imagined. Let it. Let it. Let it. At least, that's our suggestion. It's up to you. So, now, many individuals have wondered, well, if the physical ego thinks it's in charge, and attempts to shut out all other forms of communication because it doesn't trust them, coming from the higher mind, how do I know the difference between when the physical mind is telling me, oh, this is representative of your excitement, and when the higher mind is telling me, this is representative of your true excitement? How can I tell the difference? Because if the ego is attempting to trick me into staying its course, because it thinks if I veer off that we're going to die, it's going to dangle all sorts of carrots in front of me to get me to stay on that course. So how do I tell the difference between that kind of a carrot and the carrot that represents going in the direction of my true self? All right, fair question. It all comes down to what we have spoken of so often. It all comes down to excitement. It all comes down to passion. But again, we hear the ego saying, how can I tell the difference? How do I know it's really my true excitement? Now, this requires paying some attention to yourself. Really paying attention to the true feelings. It does require at least a modicum of willingness. A modicum of willingness to tell the ego to shut the hell up. At least just for a moment. So that I can hear my true self. At least take a breath. At least take a pause. At least stop and wonder whether or not you are actually being shown something that is representative of a fear or something that is representative of a joy. Because we understand that when you're in that confused state, anxiety can actually seem like excitement. And excitement can actually seem like anxiety. But this is why it's so critical to take that pause, to allow yourself to at least be in charge enough, be willing enough to tell the ego to be quiet for a moment so that you can get in touch with your inner being and tell the difference in the quality of the vibration of the emotion you are feeling at that moment with respect to the idea you are exploring. If you are quiet for that moment and willing to be open to be shown what it actually is, you will be able to tell the difference. You'll be able to develop the discernment of the difference between the vibration of fear and doubt and the vibration of joy and certainty. you will be able to tell the difference, because that ability to tell the difference is built into you. It's built into your consciousness. And at that level, you all know the difference. But if the ego is making too much noise, if it's not allowing you to stop and think, it does that specifically to prevent you from being able to tell the difference, because it's afraid that if you tell the difference, it won't be in charge anymore. And to the ego, that means death, because it doesn't believe the higher self really exists. So, it's all about finding that space of balance and peace within yourself that will allow you, even if only just for a moment, to allow the ego to be quiet enough so that you can use the natural mechanism of balance within your being that will tell you what the flavor of the emotion you're feeling is. And thus, by identifying the flavor of the emotion, that will then put you in touch with what kind of belief and definition you would have to have in order to be generating that emotion. And then you will know whether it comes from the physical negative ego or from the higher self, whether it is representative of fear, whether it is representative of excitement. But you need that moment of quietude. You need that moment of solitude. You need that moment of peace. You have to be willing to step back. You have to be willing to let it be all right to not know what's going on at the moment. You have to be willing to say, I don't know what's happening here, instead of just assuming it's this or that or the other thing. So anytime you find yourself in doubt about what you're experiencing, take that moment and say, I don't know what's happening, and that's okay. And in that moment where you have actually admitted that you don't know what's going on, you can find the balance, the quiet, the peace, the stillness that will actually then start to allow you to be more sensitive to the quality of the vibration of what's going on, and give you more capability of having more insight as to what you are experiencing and what you are dealing with in terms of the physical mind or the higher mind. So, that's the first step in forming the relationship, in reconnecting, in remembering who you are as a whole person. That's the first step, is just taking a moment of quiet, of pause, of stepping back into a neutral place and letting it be all right to not know what the answer is. As soon as you allow yourself to be all right in that balance point, you can allow the natural senses you were created with to begin to fill that stillness, to fill that little void of quietness, and they will begin to be heard. But you have to be quiet to hear them at first, because they have been suppressed for so long in your society that at first it will only seem like a whisper, but you'll recognize it. In the quiet, if you truly allow the quiet to happen, there will be no other sound, and thus you'll be able to recognize the quality of those little whispered voices for what they are. And as soon as you really start paying attention to what they are, you can start to guide yourself with them in the direction of your preference. And as you do that, bit by bit, and this may take some practice, it's all right, bit by bit, you will start to gain more discernment as to exactly what vibration is representative of what, and you will start to pacify the ego into understanding that it's not going to die, it's not going to be annihilated, that in fact this is what it really wants, because it is tired of laboring under such stressful circumstances, it is tired of bearing the weight, and you're going to take the load off and you're going to bring it along. It's not going to go anywhere. It is your friend. You love it. It is serving you. It is designed for a purpose of focusing you in the physical reality experience you wanted to have, in the theme you wanted to explore, and you cannot live without it. Literally, you cannot live without it. So in that sense, while you are forming a more loving relationship with your higher mind, the key to forming a more loving relationship with your higher mind is to actually form a more loving relationship with your ego and not allow it to continue to burden itself unbearably when it has no business doing so, because it was never designed to handle that kind of weight, that kind of stress. So it's all about loving all aspects of yourself enough to be trusting enough to let them fall back into their proper place in the relationship, do the job they were designed to do, and thus then allow yourself to be loving enough to yourself to reap the benefit of that balanced relationship between physical mind and higher mind, so you can function as a whole person. Does this make sense?
Yes.
All right. Having said that, we may now, if you wish, open to questions and